talk about Ukrainian women writers, but I do want to talk a little bit about English women writers. For instance, somebody said something about science fiction. The first real science fiction book was written by Mary Shelley, the wife of the poet Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. Her family was very strong and involved in women's rights and the development and emancipation of women in Britain in the 18th century. And she wrote the novel Frankenstein. And it was the first real scientific, or first real science fiction book that was ever written. In this same period, there were several other famous women writers. Now, you'll have probably heard of Jane Austen, Maria Edgeworth, the Bronte sisters. All of these novels, all of this creativity came from these girls. This was the first period in world history in which girls were actually educated. And they had, even though a lot of them didn't really go to school, their fathers, their parents educated them at home, and they became educated. This is the first blossoming of literature, period, and women writers appeared in this period of time. Not only these women, but the prejudice against women writers was also very strong at this time, and some women adopted men's names. For example, George Sand. I've forgotten her name as a woman, but she took on this pseudonym, and she was the lover and had a long relationship with the pianist Chopin, and she was very involved in writing and art. And so this is the first period of time when you really see women emerging from the shadows of the fact that they had been not educated and not been literate. And there's a whole series of wonderful creative this is a wonderful creative period of time, really the blossoming of women into literature. And also, just a little bit later, the first woman painter that I know about is the Impressionist Mary Cassatt from France. And this woman was really the first female painter to be accepted and widely respected in the art community. So this is really the beginning and the blossoming and the birth of women coming out of this period of time of being held back by not being literate. So. Which century? Oh, it's the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century. So the novel began in the middle of the 18th century with Clarissa by Richardson, and then a whole slew of women writers started appearing at this time, at the end of the 18th century, the beginning of the 19th century. And then there's many of them. George Eliot is also one of them. She also, in order to be accepted in society, she had to write under a pseudonym, taking a man's name. So this was how writing first began in this period of literature. The emancipation, the freedom of women coming literally through education. That's okay.